My name is Faith Gray, and I would be very happy this morning to welcome you to the third book review of the 2023 season. And it is my great pleasure to introduce today Rick Pirozzolo, who will be reviewing The Art Thief by Noah Charney. Although Rick needs no introduction, I'm sure there might be some things you might not know about him. Rick is currently, I'm not going to tell any secrets. Rick is currently executive director and curator of the Arnett Art Museum, a landmark institution of fine art and a gem in our community. If you've not been to the Arnett recently, you need to go. I will tell you a little secret about the Arnett that you might not know. If you are a member of the Arnett Art Museum, you can go visit museums all over the United States. It's a total win-win. So join the Arnett. I'll go on to what I was talking about. Rick took over the administrative and creative operations in 2007, has energized the museum, has managed $700,000 in renovation and facility upgrade, administrative restructuring, and now strategic planning. They're now in the midst of a huge project to restore the pillars of this historic building. Before becoming director of the museum, Rick was director of the Elmira Downtown Development and was responsible for $4 million in grants. He's an accomplished theatrical director and designer with over 160 productions to his name. He has served on the boards of many organizations, including the Chemung County Chamber of Commerce, Finger Lakes Wine Country, Southern Tier Economic Growth, Summer Cohesion of Chemung County, Near West Side Neighborhood Association, Elmira College President's Council for the Arts of the Finger Lakes. He has served on the review committee for the New York State Council of the Arts Funding and Decentralization Grants Project. And he is the founder of the Southern Finger Lakes Director Roundtable, which works to encourage collaboration between and among nonprofit organizations. He has produced events for several national charities. Rick has an amazing way with people. His creative and fabulous personality encourages institutions he works with to succeed. We're very fortunate that he's agreed to take time out of his schedule to give a book report today.
I saw Faith's notes about that introduction, and I thought, oh, there's a quote in the book we're going to talk about today that I should read. Thanking Faith for her lovely introduction. Everything she said is true. However, she neglected to mention my Nobel Prize in Chemistry and my fantastic collection of humorous corkscrews. Where are my notes? Sorry about this. I will say, when Faith called me, she said, oh, pick a book and talk. Well, tell me more. What do you want? What should I be talking about? Oh, I think people will be interested in what you do for a living. People are always fascinated about the inner workings of the museum. And so maybe something in that field. And I thought, well, okay. And I ought to do, rather than a book I love, I ought to, because I don't get to read a lot. I love books, but I don't get to read a lot for pleasure. So I ought to just pick one. So I asked around, and I also said to Faith, so what are you talking about? Am I critically reviewing a book? Am I giving a book report? My staff has been singing that song from Charlie Brown, a book report about Peter Rabbit. And I was like, perfect. I can just come and talk about Peter Rabbit for an hour. But anyway, Faith said, do what you like. You got our crowd for an hour and we'll talk. Well, that's a little dangerous with me. And also, I've been debating with myself, at what point am I going to admit this? So why don't I admit it 2 minutes into the conversation? Hated it. And so I had a really hard time thinking about how am I gonna make this a worthwhile hour with our friends at the Steel. I don't just want to say, you know, this is a bad book and here's why. Although, frankly, I am going to do that. I think there are always redeeming qualities to works of art, and obviously a book is always a work of art, but this one didn't really speak to me. And the place that I got it, when I talked to Faith, I said, any other suggestions? No, choose something in your field, as I said. And so I spoke to a friend of mine, I talked to a lot of my friends, and I talked to somebody that I really respect and who you ought to respect too. They're a senior conservator at the Getty Institute. You know, we're talking about an important art person. And they recommended this book. And so I thought, oh, well, this must be, you know, an important book. Okay, well, anyway, how it came to be, it came to be, and I did talk to Faith. We had a little miscommunication, and she thought I was talking about a book, same title, different author, who her book group had loved. So then I kind of felt disappointed in myself for my choice. Long story short, I was committed, and I didn't feel like, to Faith, I should say, oh, I want to change to a different book, especially after she had told all of you in your newsletter. So that's what I did. I will say this, almost every art object has value, and I think there is value in this book, and I think there are some, the reason that I think people who are not in my industry, there's a lot in our industry that's mysterious, and you know, we talk a lot about, I'm thrilled that Faith said, oh, be a member of the museum, and I see many of you out in the audience here are members. I feel like there are lots of people in our community and in our world who think you have to have the secret handshake to be a museum member, to come through that big old heavy white door under the big old 180-year-old pillars on Lake Street. And so there's a lot of mystery around what we do in the museum world and in the museum building 2 blocks away. So that was my rationale for choosing a book about art. In our business, we don't like to talk about thievery, but it actually, part of the reason I'm going to tell you, one of the ways I got through my planning for this talk was, I have to tell them I dislike this book, but I also love a series of books that are all about art restoration and, frankly, crime. And I'm going to tell them a little bit more about that one too. But I have to make this book make sense, since you were encouraged to look at it and think about it. So I thought I'd tell you a few of the things that I think are really interesting and something good about this author. And this is an author who is an art conservator and who's an art historian and really very educated in our business. And in many ways, a beautiful writer. He puts a lot of flowery but important language in the mouths of his characters. I don't think there is not much of a narrator here. And I feel like when you have so much exposition to share with the reader and you don't have a narrator, you put in the characters' mouths all this exposition, and there they were on the carpet that was blue and red. And an omniscient narrator can just say, on the blue and red carpet, there was a group of people in the room listening to a lecture. In this, a character has to say, and here I am standing on this carpet, and it gets very tedious. There is, however, some good writing here and some interesting evocative language. So I've marked a lot of passages, and I thought, well, I'm going to share the stuff that's interesting because those pieces, those speeches that the characters make are what interested me here and gave evocation to the language here. And I felt like this is what might interest you across the podium. So opening the book, page 1, I thought, oh, this is promising. It was almost as if she were waiting, hanging there in the painted darkness. The small Baroque church of Santa Giuliana in Trastevere huddled in a corner of the warm Roman night. The streets were blue and motionless, illuminated only by the hushed light of a street lamp from the square nearby. There was a sound inside the church. It was the faintest scream of metal on metal, barely perceptible in daylight, but now like a shriek of white against black. Then it stopped. The sound had been only momentary, but it echoed. From out of the belly of the sealed church, a bird rose. A pigeon fluttered frantically along the shadowy chapel walls and swooped through the vaults and down the transept, carving a path blindly through the inky, cavernous interior. Then the alarm went off. Father Amoroso woke with a start. Sweat clung to his receded hairline. He looked at his bedside clock, 3:15. Night still clung outside his bedroom window, but the ringing in his ear would not stop. Then he noticed that it was not only in his ear. He threw a robe over his nightshirt and slipped on his sandals. In a moment he was down the stairs, and he ran the few paces across the square to Santa Giuliana in Trastevere, which squatted like an armadillo, he had once thought, but now vibrated with the sound. Father Amoroso fumbled with his keys and finally pulled open the ancient door, swollen in the humidity. He turned to the anachronism just inside, switching off the alarm. He looked around for a moment, then he picked up the telephone. Scusi, signore, I'm here. Yes, I don't know, probably a malfunction with the alarm system, but just a moment. Father Amoroso put the police on hold as he surveyed the interior. Nothing moved. The darkness sat politely around the edges of the church, and the moonlight on the nave cast shadows through the pews. He took a step forward, then thought better of it. He turned on the lights. The Baroque hall sprung slowly to life. Spotlights on its various alcoves and treasures illuminated the empty spaces vicariously. Father Amoroso stepped forward into the center of the nave and scanned. There was the chapel of Santa Giuliana, the Domenichino painting of Santa Giuliana, the confessional, the white marble basin of holy water, the prayer candelabra with the offerte sign, the statue of San Agnese by Maderno, the Byzantine icon and chalices within the vitrine, the Caravaggio painting of the Annunciation above the altar, the reliquary that buried the shin bone of Santa Giuliana behind a sea of gold and glass. Nothing seemed out of place. Promising. I thought, oh, we're going to learn about artists and we're going to learn about art making and Renaissance art especially. And then he fooled me. Number one, there is no church of Santa Giuliana in Trastevere. There is Santa Maria, which is very, I feel like he must have modeled this church that he describes here on Maria, which is an existing place with a Domenichino painting in the ceiling that is amazing and a place that is beautiful to visit. But I thought, oh, I'm stepping in here. This guy, this author, then says, now I'm gonna throw everything at you and we're gonna go on a journey. Journeys are great, but sometimes too long and too complicated. So, throwing things at the wall, characters. So this novel has every stereotypical character you might want to come up with. The next character, this was Father Amoroso. He sounds interesting, and his dialogue with the police is really, I could feel myself in the middle of Rome when I was reading this, and then we never see him again. We spent a chapter and a half with him, and the Caravaggio altarpiece is stolen, and we don't talk about it again until the last 20 pages of the book. And Caravaggio is one of my favorites. So I thought, oh, we'll be learning a lot and spending time with him, and we did it. So next character we meet is Geneviève de la Cloche, who's a stereotypical French woman. She's tall, wears white pants, has long blonde hair, and smokes. And swears. So you know who she is. We all can see her. I feel like I'm going to write. One thing I discovered about this, as I learned, it was on page 63 that I thought, do I call Faith and pick a different book? But at page 63, I went and did a little research into the author, and this is his first novel. And he has written, when I was choosing the book, I looked and he had written others. He also is as a scientist and technologist, really interested in art conservation and art history, and he's absolutely interested in sharing everything he knows with you and me. And for me, that's my industry, and I'm interested in it, and I think, as I said earlier, it's mysterious to many people who don't come through the doors and who don't talk about the things that we talk about. So I felt like this is gonna make sense if I'm spending 300 pages with this guy talking about these things. Again, didn't quite. So Delacroix, the next woman we meet, the French woman, is the vice president of the Malevich Society. Some of you might know the artist Malevich. He's famed for the suprematist works that are the quintessential object of going into a modern art museum and saying, I could do that. And the paintings that he talks about, that the artist talks about here, and who are next, so we've talked a little bit about a Caravaggio altarpiece, and now we're looking at a Malevich suprematist painting. It's all white, 60 inches square, and it's all white. And this is the painting now, and the issue in chapter 2 is it authentic or not? And I find suprematism really interesting. I'm a contemporary art specialist, and my true love is Baroque and Renaissance art, but I find the sort of early, the sort of 20th century modernists really interesting. Those paintings that you say, well, my 5-year-old could make that, and those paintings that are, Malevich made the big black squares on a big piece of canvas. He made the white, but he also made some other geometric pieces, and we learned a little bit. I'm going to read some more. I hope you're okay with reading.
Yes.
We discovered that a painting is announced for auction at Christie's, and Delacroix has decided that this can't be that painting in the catalog, because the painting that we're talking about she's the vice president of the Malevich Society, and in our business, many artists have foundations and societies that are responsible for authenticating work by important artists, generally dead ones. So she's the VP, and she's an expert on Malevich, and she's looking at these catalogs from Christie's saying that painting is not authentic. It can't be authentic because the big 60-inch square white painting is downstairs here at the foundation in our vaults. So she starts talking about who Malevich is. He strikes a balance between whiteness and nothingness, and he magnificently transforms this tense contrast in a contemplative meditation on inner tension. These works are wholly about feeling. Malevich has divorced himself from depictions of the everyday, of life and objects, and has honed his abilities into the projection of emotion. There is no right or wrong answer to the question, what is this painting about? The question is, what does this make you feel? It is both revolution and ideology, abstract forms that may be appropriated by any viewer to his or her own end. Malevich frees his viewers from the shackles of iconography and liberates them into a world of concentrated feeling. He did so long before such abstract works were popularized. It's objective art in that it does not rely on specialized knowledge for interpretation, as might a painting of a scene from classical mythology, which requires a recognition of the story in order to understand the action and glean the moral. It's a liberation from the excess clutter that impedes the path to pure emotion. It is an almost Buddhist focus, pushing aside the trappings of traditional paintings of things it provokes. For Malevich, the reaction was one of transcendental meditation and peace. But the painting is equally successful if it provokes anger in the viewer, who may say, outraged, how is this art? I could paint that. In answer to this exclamation, if one actually sat down and tried to paint exactly this, one would find that it is impossible. The textures and tones, despite the monochromatic palette, are deep and subtle. Painting such a work is easier said than done. But in one's outrage, the painting has succeeded. It provokes emotion. Suprematist art reaches for the stars and thereby creates a new emotional constellation that hangs in the sky for all to see and interpret as they will. That's a great way to speak about those abstract, non-objective works. When I get that question, generally in the museum, when somebody comes by and we have a naive painting, or we don't show a whole lot of mid-century work in, American work that is the flat geometry, but when we do, somebody says, well, I could paint that, or my kid could paint that. My answer is always, first of all, some of you know me, it's a little bit flip, and my answer is, yeah, but you didn't. That's usually my answer. Now, I wanna, although this speaks to specifically to the suprematists, that's a good way to speak about what those kind of paintings that are not necessarily, as they say, of something, make sense. So again, I've been reading for quite a while, I'm only on page 9. And this artist is sharing a lot, this author is sharing a lot of his knowledge, which is one of the things we do as authors. We're not gonna write about what we don't know. So far, I'm buying into this book. I'm feeling like, wow, I'm gonna be thinking about all the things I like to think about in my work, but I don't have a chance to think about. So Delacroix, this character that we've met, says, this was her talking about this work. And so she is darn sure from looking at a photograph in the catalog that this painting is not an authentic Malevich piece. I feel like it's a little, he also, the artist, I'm trying to stick to my notes because, again, some of you know me, and I might be here till 5 o'clock, so I want to stick to my notes and get through this whole book. One of the things I wrote in my notes was this author speaks, he has the character having a phone conversation, quote from the other speaker, the one we don't hear, as if the reader can't infer what the other speaker is saying. And this is where I started to think, this guy has never written a book before. So I need to say the thing, well, hello, Faith, how are you? Oh, you're calling me to ask me to speak to Book Sandwich Inn? Oh, yes, I'm here at my office at the Arnott Art Museum. And this is what I find this artist doing. And throughout, I thought I had a quote, a passage to read about that, but I think you understand what I'm saying. It's a little clunky for me. So I'm starting to get, as I'm reading this book, okay, I'm really interested in these subjects, and I'm really interested in the way he's sharing them. So first, we've just done the let's talk about what's happening in Italy. Now what's happening in Paris when we're about to auction this painting. We've learned a little bit about this artist. But again, now we throw a new character at us. And I'm only up to 3, but I'm skipping about 4 out of every 5 characters. Now we meet Simon Barrow, who's, again, very stereotypical, but also very sort of entertaining. This is a lecturer speaking at the National Gallery of Art in London, and who is like your favorite teacher. This great art history lecturer that you can't wait to get to his class. And he's the place we learn all this history that really does not apply to what's going on in the book. But we sit for 10 and 20 pages through his lecture, which is really entertaining. And you have this you feel this affinity to him in the way that he has this connection with his students. He's very flip with them, he's very sarcastic, and he's really interested. And you probably guessed, the way that I thought I'd get through this book is by reading a lot of it to you. So I'm going to get reading again. We're now learning about Professor Barrow talking about iconography. Imagine you've never seen an image before. I know that's difficult to conceive, but most medieval Europeans, without the large quantities of money required to commission art for themselves, would never have beheld an image. Without printing, every image must be handmade. Materials are very expensive, so the only art that exists is made on commission. Mirrors and glass are also very expensive. It's entirely possible that the only image you've ever seen as a medieval peasant was your own reflection in water. Imagine then that when you come to church, you're confronted with this. He gestured toward the magnificent altarpiece, so large and beaming with gold. The figures painted here may look two-dimensional to you, you dismal sheep. Again, talking to college students, But imagine how realistic they would seem if you had never seen an image before. The awe that must have provoked. The admiration for God and the church is astounding. So peel away your jaded egos and bathe in this. Stop looking, you know what, I'm going to skip that sentence because he's also a little bit misogynistic. And we're trying to, as an artist, describe his relationship with his students. And he only talks to women and he often comments on the way they look. So I'm skipping 2 sentences. And he makes me mad about that. The altarpiece is iconography exemplary. For those of you looking confused and drug-addled, the word icon is Greek and means image. Iconography is the study of symbolic images within art. There's always been a formulaic way to present the most common images in the Bible, and this is a painting of the heavenly choir. In early paintings, the most important figures were made larger than the rest. So we have Jesus and Mary enthroned and clearly have taken their vitamins in the center. Also, only divine figures were painted facing front, which is why only the big boppers, Jesus and Mary, are thus here. Now, who can tell me what the single most expensive aspect of this painting is? He looked out in a sea of confusion. Anonymous response, the gold. No, but that's exactly what I thought you'd say, so you've provided the perfect segue, thank you. What you're reacting to is gold leaf. The process is delicate. Sheets of gold are hammered to a width thinner than paper, so thin, in fact, that they would crumble if you touched them with a fat and oily finger. So what did these brilliant medieval craftsmen do? They took a brush made with animal fur and rubbed it in their own head of hair, creating static electricity. Using the static, they could pick up the sliver-thin gold leaf and press it onto the gessoed piece of poplar wood that would become this altarpiece, using an egg as glue. No, you turkeys, the most expensive aspect of this painting is blue. You can always tell which medieval paintings cost the most by how much blue is in them. Blue was made with lapis lazuli, the philosopher's stone of alchemical fame, a pigment that was dangerously imported from what is now Afghanistan and was the single most expensive thing one could buy during the Middle Ages. Artists did not go down to the corner store and buy tubes of paint along with their marijuana cigarettes and hair dye. Not until the mid-19th century. Each artist ground his own pigments, dipped his brush in an open cracked egg, dipped in the pigment, and went to work. This is tempera on panel. Almost all altarpieces are on large pieces of wooden panel, usually poplar wood in Italian works. The wood is covered in white gesso. Remember that gesso is the white plaster-based preparatory layer painted between the support and the colored paint. Then a drawing is made of the outline of figures, then tempera paint is added. Not until the advent of oil paints, which we'll see in the next room, could true subtlety and layering be employed in the paintings. You slap on tempera paint, that's pigment mixed with egg white as a binder, and basta, you're done. Then a gilder would come in and add the gold leaf, sometimes using a tool to decorate with impressions. And voila, you have a very expensive work of art. These would exist almost exclusively in churches, paid for by wealthy patrons who were told that they could buy their way into heaven, a practice which continues in American televangelism. He's a really entertaining professor. Sorry. And again, I find him interesting, and I can move through this book in these kind of lectures and this kind of exposition. But we do have a series of thefts to get to, and all we've done is lecture me, the reader. This is my business, and I like this kind of lecture, and I think there are people, I hope these kind of lectures, at least the parts that I've been picking out and reading, might be of interest to you, but it's not working for the book. It's made the book really hard. I said it's too much narrative exposition early, and then I wrote myself, am I too close to the art world and all this exposition? Exposition is important for somebody outside my world. And then 4 times, and through here, if you look, I do consider books sacred, but I also do a lot of writing in the margins and things. I don't know if you all do that, but I do. My books all have my notes on them and little stars and things. And here, I noted, this morning I was making notes about what I wanted to talk about, and I wrote, come on, with exclamation marks, 4 times on different pages. And then I wrote several times, ridiculous. So again, we've met some more people, but we still have lots more people to meet, and I feel like we're meeting them through, and I will tell you what the book's about soon. But I thought, and now I have another long reading that I want to share with you, and then we'll talk a little bit about the plot of this novel. Gabriel Coffin, really interesting. I thought, as I'm reading this, now we're up to page 42. I felt like, okay, now we're going to understand what this book is about, and how we're going to solve the thefts, and so what has happened so far is we've had the theft of the Caravaggio altarpiece, and where we've learned about the theft of the Malevich suprematist painting, but they've been sort of ancillary to what we've been getting lectured about. And now we get one more lecture, and Coffin, I think, and I'm wrong, that he is our protagonist. I don't think there is one in this book. I don't think we planned. I think this artist said, I can really share all the stuff I know about art and show how smart I am, which I try to do all the time too. I don't think that's not an admirable thing. I think sometimes we write to share, I hope a lot of the times, we write to share our knowledge, and we read to share the author's knowledge. So I think it's an okay thing. But if you're doing it without the structure underneath it of an interesting story and a plot line that has a beginning, a middle, and an end, what are we doing here? So we meet one more guy. He's, I think, our protagonist, and again, I'm wrong, but so we've learned that he is an internationally renowned art crime expert. And I think that our author, fancies himself an internationally renowned. So I think this guy is the parallel to our author. So he says, let me paint you a portrait of the most successful unsolved art crime of the century. Anybody know what that is? This isn't a test, but do you know what it is? In my business, we all know.
Is it Isabel?
Yes, it is.
Yeah.
It's the Isabella Stewart Gardner theft. Painting stolen in the middle of the night, but right under the eyes of closed-circuit TV, with guards in the building, well, I think he tells you about it, so maybe I'll let him tell you. A sea of faces like ripple-topped waves stared up at Gabriel Coffin. Boston, Massachusetts, 1990. At 1:24 a.m., the morning after the St. Patrick's Day revels, two men in police uniforms knocked on the side door of the Venetian-style mansion that houses the Isabella Stewart Gardner. They said that they were investigating a disturbance in the grounds. Against museum regulations, the two guards on duty let them in. The guards were handcuffed, duct taped, and locked in separate areas of the dark cellar. No weapons were seen or used during the heist. The two thieves were described as follows, and he describes the thieves. And then he says, I ought to describe them for you. One white male, late 20s to mid 30s, 5'7" to 5'10", medium build, dark eyes, black short cut hair, wearing a dark shiny mustache that appears to be false and square shaped, gold framed glasses, and probably false. The other thief, white male, early to mid 30s, 6 feet to 6'1", 180 to 200 pounds, dark eyes and black medium length hair, a black shiny mustache that appears to be false, no glasses. You'd think false mustaches and glasses might be obvious, but perhaps not. The thieves stole carefully among chosen paintings, ignoring many of high value, such as the Fra Angelico, the Titian, and Raphael, but making off with Vermeer's Concert, Manet's Chez Tortoni, Rembrandt's Storm of the Sea of Galilee, as well as 5 pieces by Degas and a bronze Chinese beaker. They tried and failed to open a vitrine that contained a Napoleonic battle flag, and instead took the eagle-shaped fitment to the flag. Titian's Rape of Europa, probably the most valuable painting in any museum in the United States, was untouched. Other than a panic button on the guard's desk, the museum alarm was not rigged to trigger from the inside, only from external breaches. The thieves, on their departure, seized electronic video surveillance. The thieves were in the museum from 1:24 to 2:45 a.m. Current estimates list the stolen works at a total value of $300 million, but as with any estimation of price, it's fairly arbitrary and could be much less or much more, depending on the buyer and the market in general. We're talking now about probably $500 million. The pieces are still missing, and the Gardner hangs the frames from, the painted pieces were cut from their frames, and the Gardner leaves the frames hanging. So you go in and you see them empty. He talks much more, and I had chosen a much longer passage about this that I wanted to share because it's really interesting. And now I'm second guessing myself. Maybe you do want to read this book, because the rest, I could probably go on for another, I don't know, it's about 6 more pages about this theft. And it's what he's doing is profiling the potential thieves. And it's really interesting, both for me, who sometimes reads crime fiction as a diversion, and talking about how we think about those people and why they might steal paintings. Those paintings are, it's probably self-evident that those paintings can't be sold. You know, you'd never be able to show them. So most experts believe that those paintings were taken on commission from somebody who could afford to have them stolen and put in their basement, behind their pool table, to sit and look in their billion-dollar mansion, to just sit and look at them and never show them to anyone else. Because if they ever show them to someone else, the word's going to get out. There have been lots of clues and lots of leads on that theft, and the gardener has what I think is now a $15 million reward out for the capture of the works. And the other book I'm going to suggest you to read has the recovery of one of those works that I think is magical in that other book. But as of today, none of the works from the gardener have been returned. And this author, again, sharing his real knowledge of art theft and profiling and the art world and art history, really makes a strong case. He sort of solves the case in this. I feel like, is somebody reading this and then following these leads that he gives us? Some of you, a little diversion here, some of you might know that a staff member at the Arnett, who was with us for 10 years, who happens to be our DA's daughter, Laura Wetmore, left us to become an FBI special agent. She works in Boston and has responsibility in the art crime unit. So Laura has, when something new comes up on the Gardner theft, Laura's involved in all the work on it. So I keep telling her, this is your mission in life, to solve that crime. And then, you know, I always say Elmira is the center of the universe. Well, it started with Laura, and then she goes to Boston and will solve that crime eventually. So we love her and we miss her, but she's doing great things in Boston. Again, I said the same thing, and I said the author puts the exposition in the voice of the character instead of in an omniscient narration. By the way, I just said this section about the gardener is 12 pages, has nothing to do with the rest of the book. It's really interesting, and I'm finding myself reading you the things that are interesting to me, and I hope might be interesting to you, but again, what's this book about? I did also say, that's one of my real arguments with his writing style, is this exposition in the voice of the character, so that if he just allowed the narrator to just tell us what's going on and set the scene, and maybe tell us what's in the mind of the characters, we'd move along more quickly and we'd buy into the story a little bit better. I have, as Faith told you, I have a little history in the theater, and we say in the theater, show us, don't tell us. So if the narrator were describing what was happening and was able to speak from a position of omniscience, so that we could learn some things that maybe the characters don't know, it would be, I feel like, a much more interesting book. Okay, I'm on the second half of my notes, and I finally get to the story. We've had the suspicion around the Malevich painting. We've had and again, first 6 pages, Malevich painting and Caravaggio altarpiece, and lots more exposition. And now I'm on page 63, where I decided this ain't a good book. But I think you ought to know the story. So again, a book report of Peter Rabbit, I ought to tell you what happens in the story, and it gets crazy. We auction the painting at Sotheby's. It has a beautiful description of what happens in auctions. And you know, one of the things we do at the museum, I haven't done it in many years, but we like to bring our family members, frankly, donors, to art auctions to help us when we're buying work. Because it's, again, another mysterious thing in our business that the general public doesn't know about. And it's fascinating. And there's fascinating information about what happens in a fine art auction at Christie's here in the book. We have that auction. 2 of the Malevich paintings are purchased. One is purchased, we believe it's fake anyway. The French woman who smokes is saying, oh no, this can't be real. Then we meet another character, Elizabeth Vandermeer. She's the tight director of a museum. And we do learn a lot about her, and oh, that's the analog to me, so I don't know what that is supposed to mean, but it really comes back to haunt me in the end. She's the director of the National Gallery of Modern Art, which doesn't exist in Britain. They have a National Gallery, but they don't have a modern art special branch. But she buys the Malevich painting that's listed in the catalog for $6.3 million for the museum. One of the things that the Christie story tells is if we were buying a blue chip piece like that, the director would never attend. You would, you'd want an auction expert there. I'd do that thing that we all hear about an auction like this, and I'd be bidding $7 million, and we'd be in real trouble. I mean, I do love the auction world, and we do that in our business. But when we're talking in the 7 figures, it's a real. It takes special training. But she attends the art auction, buys that painting, brings it to the conservation house within the museum, leaves it there. I'm just going to describe this goofy, crazy, convoluted story. While she's buying it, her museum, somebody hacks into the computers and everything goes haywire in the museum. But you find out they don't steal anything. So they think, oh, that was weird. And they decide, again, bumbling Scotland Yard. Well, not again, I haven't told you about the Scotland Yard guy. Harry Wickenden, who at one point they have a theft and there's dust all over the place and he goes in and is doing all this stuff and somebody says, don't you want to look at fingerprints? And he said, oh no, they're too smart for that. I don't think any investigator would ever say, oh no, I'm going to make this choice that our thief is really smart so they wouldn't leave fingerprints. And he has a big overweight wife who's always eating, and he says all these kind of stereotypical British things, Scotland Yard. It just is, it's crazy. But anyway, the hack is happening at the museum and the computers all go down. She buys a painting, she brings it back for conservation at the museum. 2 days later, they steal that painting, and the hack was actually a preparatory thing to set it up so they could steal the painting, but nobody realized it. And then they didn't do anything to bump up security. And then another painting is sold at the auction that looks suprematist like we described earlier, but is ugly, and they're very dismissive of this painting. So somebody else buys that for £1,500, and another person wants to buy it from him after he's already paid $1,500. They want to give him $10,000 for it. Well, why didn't they just bid $2,000? Doesn't make sense. He takes it home. They steal that. They break into his skylight. And they go. Somebody steals that. Then they get ransom on the $6.3 million painting. And then we meet new characters. Frenchmen who are looking into the disauthenticated Malevich painting, and they're French eater gluttons. I mean, I'm just going to read. It's so ridiculous. The waiter had just brought 2 plates of the eponymous dish at Au Pied de Cochon as Jean-Jacques Bizot arrived, hot-cheeked and breathless. Jean-Paul Legorge did not pause to look up from his plate as his nimble knife and fork sliced with surgical precision into the crackly skin of the pig's foot, peeling the knobby bones away from the succulent flesh. And they have arguments, and I read them. Who are those? I actually wrote it down. The 2 guys on the Muppets, Statler and Waldorf, those 2 guys, that's who these guys are playing. I can totally see those 2 Muppets playing these guys. They're bumbling, and now this, and you think I've told you about the confusing part of the plot? No, that was the simple part. Now, the Coffin, the guy who's given us the lecture from the Courtauld Institute, we think is the protagonist of this story, says, well, I need help from somebody who's now in prison in Torino, so we're going to go get this person out, and this person has a sort of secret, Valambroso their name is, and we need to get Valambroso because they're going to help me figure out the theft of the Caravaggio. And okay, they do all this, and they just let this person out on parole or probation. I don't know what they do, but oh, you're in jail, but that's okay. You can go out and help them figure this other thing. And they only speak of this person as Valambroso, which means sort of shady valley in Italian, shadow. And this person gets out, and then at the very end of a chapter, you find out she's his who you think is the hero protagonist. She's his lover, and he's just getting her out because he loves her and he wants to hang out there. And she's going to solve the problem. So it's actually a woman, and she's. I put in my notes we never hear from her again, but that is not true. And I'll get to that. I have 9 minutes left. And now the rest. And I'm just going to read you this. So we've sprung the thief to help Coffin find the Caravaggio painting. Then we discover she's a female, and he starts doing, back to the misogyny of this work, he starts saying like really kind of inappropriate things for a novel about art theft. And then we have the Statler and Waldorf discover all these biblical clues that have been left. And you know what happens in these sort of amateurish crime novels? The thief always leaves a clue. What, if I'm stealing a $6.3 million painting, I'm not going to write a reference to a biblical chapter on the wall so that they can find it. And they have this theory that is an interesting one, and they do get into religious iconography and fundamental religion, and look at one of Malevich's, the tenets of his practice were the elimination of iconography in art, because the whole iconography within, especially Northern Renaissance art, icons always were symbols of specific stories from the Bible or specific lessons that we should learn, those kind of things. And as we said earlier in one of these quotes, art was the closest, fine art was the closest you could get to divinity, to perfection, and thus to God. And Malevich believed, take away all that imitation, put the simple whiteness on and cover up all that, our trying to imitate perfection, and cover it all up and experience only the emotion and worship your God that way. And it's a really interesting thought, and the author writes about these biblical quotes start coming 3/4 of the way into the book, that these are going to be the clues into this convoluted thing. I mean, my notes say, biblical clues, the thieves leave hints. Now we have this wealthy man who has a gallery, who has a secret room on the 3rd floor that we find a way into his secret room and into his secret safe, but it's the world's toughest safe to get into, and you have to do 2 numbers to the right and 2 numbers to the left. And there are 7 numbers. It's this crazy thing, and they got to figure out all the numbers from about a 5-word reference to a biblical quote. Ultimately, they find. And now we learn about Albrecht Dürer, who's another favorite of mine, beautiful draftsman. He has drawings on the crazy new character, wealthy man has drawings from Dürer on his wall. And the Melancholia 1, which is a very important, famous drawing of his, has a magic square in it. I didn't know what a magic square was, but it looks like a Sudoku game. And or a tic-tac-toe board with numbers in it, and that becomes the clue, and all the numbers add up to 34, and that happens to be our 5 characters ago protagonist's favorite number, and the 34 is the number on the whole, that safe that has 7 numbers that you have to turn. You go to 34, then you go back to 34, then you go back to 34, 7 times. I mean, just crazy, and also they mess around with, they talk about the iconography and the specific religious definition of the word icon religious imagery painted to remind, especially early Jewish pilgrims and early Jewish people practicing Judaism. You would hang an icon in the upper right-hand corner of your room, so your eye would catch it when you went into the room. And so now suddenly we're talking about Judaism. We haven't talked about it. It's all been about Christianity. And now we're talking about Judaism. And suddenly this rich guy has a mezuzah at his door that is where they put the mezuzah is the container for good wishes at the front door of a Jewish household. They put the secret clues in it. And who thinks to look at it? So we do the magic square, we do the number 34, the ransom, so now the painting, the white painting is ransomed for $6.3 million, the same amount that they paid for it, which also has problems, but they go to a wealthy board member, and some of you have been board members of places like the Art Museum. They go to the board member and say, well, you have to put up the $6.3 million. And the wealthy board member says, okay, I'll do that. And 2 days later, they've already come up with and I'm telling you, I'm trying to entertain with this sort of review. This is a serious book. But it's like this guy wants to make one of those Ocean's 11 movies. You know, he wants it to be like we can all chuckle about it and we can get into the intrigue of the whole thing, but it's not serving anything beyond that. Anyway, and the reason I get to that point is this wealthy board member puts up the $6.3 million, they ransom the painting, they get it back, it's a fake, it's been overpainted, and they remove the overpaint, and they've, the early guy who was talking about, I can't believe I'm even trying to explain this plot, the early guy who was giving the lecture at the Corto, they bribe him to say that it's authentic. It's not. What they find under the overpainted Malevich, which is definitely a fake, is the Caravaggio altarpiece. But it's not, because it's a fake. But they send it back to Trastevere and hang it in the church, and Vatican is happy. And now we're on the last 10 pages of the book. And are you ready for this? The guy that we thought was our protagonist who was going to solve all the problems, no, actually it's not him first. First we learned that the smoking, no, not even this, God, I'm even confused. The tightwad director of the National Gallery, woman who bought the painting, it was all a setup because she's dating the wealthy man who gave the $6.3 million. So he was a hero by giving the $6.3 million, but then he got the painting back and he hangs it on his wall. But it's fake. How do we know it's fake? Because the guy who was the protagonist, who had to get the sneaky girl out of at the end, in the last 4 pages, they're, big surprise, in bed together, and she's saying, oh, this all worked out. And they have the true Malevich and the true Caravaggio in his apartment. End of story. It's exhausting. And you know, I kept saying, they're in cahoots, and they're in cahoots, and they're in cahoots. Oh, and to find out that the painting was a fake, they removed the overpainting in like an hour. I have a painting that's being restored and cleaned. It's been at our conservation studio for 14 months. But in this book, and this guy is an expert, they do it in an hour. I will say this, and I'm running out of time, or I'm actually out of time. The book I should have picked is Daniel Silva. If you don't know his work, he's a magical writer who is deeply researched. His character, his lead character, who truly is a lead character, is a retired director of the Israeli intelligence service. He's talking about in real time. This latest book just came out a couple months ago. I just read it, and they talk about what's happening not what's happened in the last 2 weeks, which is outrageous and tragic, but they do talk about the Ukraine war, but it's also wildly entertaining and deeply respectful of the reader. It's seriously researched and you know, it has a little sex if you're interested, nothing filthy, but I love his work, and I think this might be, I don't know, I think it probably says, I don't know, but more than a dozen books. This is his latest, and I sit and wait for another announcement that a new book of his is coming out. And in this book, a major plot point is the recovery of one of the works, the Vermeer, that was stolen from the Isabella Stewart Garden. And this is the one I wish I would have chosen, except when Faith and I talked, it wasn't out yet. Next year. Yes, you all should read it for your book clubs and those kind of things. I will say thank you for, I had no idea how I was going to talk about a book I didn't like, and I don't love the idea of, frankly, making fun of a book, because as I said earlier, I think books are sacred, and I think there is even value to a bad one.
Yes.
I think there is, in the museum, we consider value applied to what we might consider bad paintings. So I think there is, you know, as Faith and some of you, Jana and Louise, and some of the Martha people that I know, frankly, the Pirozzolos, I take what I do very seriously, but I also, whenever I get in front of people, I find the need to entertain. But again, though I am very critical of this book, and maybe I did make fun of it, I think any book is truly valuable, and if anybody wants this with all my marginalia in it, you shouldn't do that with a book. But it was a crazy, and you know, I'm going to give this guy a chance. This was his first book, but I think he's written many more, so maybe sometime because I like all of his explication. I think the story was just bonkers. So anyway, thank you.
Thank you, Rick. Thanks for a very interesting book review.
I do have to run. I have a 1 o'clock, and I'm now 2 minutes late. Thank you. Good to see you all. Those of you I know, those of you I didn't. Come to the museum and say hello.
Thank you. And next week we have our last book review, and that's October 20th. And the title of the book is Braiding Sweetgrass, Indigenous Wisdom, Scientific Knowledge, and the Teaching of Plants by Robin Wall Kimmerer. And it's reviewed by Jenny Monroe. So we're looking forward to that. Thank you very much for coming.